I think the recognition of this event is one where we are a global ecosystem. So it's not just simply the value of construction in Australia, which is running at about $350 billion a year, the construction industry turnover, but we're really part of a $12 trillion global industry. So we're very excited to be talking in that context with you, because as a regulator, I think the days of simply looking at regulation from a single jurisdiction are over. So I think we've got a couple of slides just to run through. Is that, are they loaded? Or loading? Yeah, so let's just go to the second slide if we could. I'd just like to take everybody back to the journey that we've started in New South Wales. There's been a major reform initiative supported by or led by the government. The appointment of me as a building commissioner, the first building commissioner in New South Wales. The task ahead was one that was really quite astounding. So we've been working very closely with design professionals, as we have with everybody else. But the initial messaging was that legislation wasn't going to fix the problems that we had. We really needed to understand that there were many moving parts. We needed to engage the financial sector. We needed to engage the supply chain. We needed to engage with people who are doing standards and compliance. So it's quite a spectrum of things that the government subscribed to. In the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that it's an icon that really describes the way that that the effort of the regulator in New South Wales historically has been, and that is that we've put most of our effort in a reactive mode after buildings have finished. Well, by this time next year, the regulator in New South Wales would have completely shifted its weight of effort to the front of projects. So in fact, in the year or two before they complete a project, we'll have a much greater intervention. The top right-hand column was really, or the indication was really just to share with you the view that there'd been many, many years of regulations, many attempts to put fingers in the dike and stop the problems that we've seen endemically affecting this industry. So I've used a Gartner hype cycle here just to show you where we got to in mid-19, and you can see that we're in the process of rebuilding that platform of getting the customers back to our industry. And we've been working with the industry. There's over 200 people on our working groups across these 6 pillars, which range from a legislation working group, a risk working group, an industry capability working group, a contracts and procurement working group, a digital working group, and a research working group. The research is starting now to really weigh in and demonstrate that, in fact, you can all make decisions, but you really need evidence-based decisions to move forward. So on the next slide, what you'll see is the pivot that has occurred in the way that, as a regulator, we are looking at this industry going forward. Historically, the regulator has looked at the individual players, the installers, the suppliers, but that really takes the focus away from the main game, and that is that from a residential point of view, multi-unit residential development in New South Wales, the real transactions occur between the developer and their purchasers. So we've shifted the entire focus to say, developers, you sign the contract with a purchaser, you promise to deliver the building, you engage the designers, you engage the contractors, you engage the certifiers and pay them. Their performance is your problem, and my interventions are going to be simply now focused on what do we need to do to get in front of the transaction between a developer and a consumer to ensure that people don't have to settle on apartments that are simply not up to scratch. So that's a really big pivot. It's taken us a year to get the industry to understand what that means, and it's all about developer accountability, and the developers can make good decisions or bad decisions. So what we've then done, in the next slide, you'll see that as we've started to look into this bigger picture, we've taken a different view as to what the regulator should be doing in the future and what could industry do. On the left-hand side, you'll see that our efforts are very much focused towards risk. We've built an incredible capability in this space where we can now land on the most risky players. So we're anticipating that about 20% of the industry will get our highest attention going forward. And we're looking at things like what's the character of the players, what's the motivation, and what are the opportunities that are there for them to exploit. So we're looking at dealing with that as a strategic regulatory view. And that allows us then to look beyond New South Wales as a jurisdiction into other states in Australia and into other places around the world, because unless we can see the character of the players through the full ecosystem, then as a regulator, we're going to be coming up short. So on the other side, we've said to the industry, there's no need for us to be all over you if you could take some steps to identify your trustworthiness. So, excuse me, so you'll hear Yin talking about where we're going with the trustworthiness approach to this, but we've now engaged with the private sector and people like Equifax, and we're talking to other ratings agencies to come up with a ratings for the players, starting with developers, then builders, and then we'll take that down the supply chain. And that needs to be a global capability where each of those players can present themselves so that we can look into their trustworthiness through the supply chain. That's just started, and I'm pleased to report that the players who want to be known as trustworthy are moving very quickly to that side to say, how do I get rated so I can use that as my differential, and I don't need to be as in the other side of your proceedings so that your regulators constantly in my face. So perhaps the next slide summarizes where we're up to. And this is where Yin will start to take over from me, and that is that building capability for a modern regulator, if we're going to be dealing with designers and manufacturers and suppliers around the world, we need to be able to have a deep engagement with that entire ecosystem. So the building assurance solution, which we've just, a project which we've just started, and it will stand up in the next year, we'll look at all of the inputs into a building from where they came anywhere around the world into the building, such that we've got a single source of truth of the authenticity of every input into the building. And on the other side, what we're looking to then do is to build a practitioner digital twin, such that every practitioner that touches a building in New South Wales, no matter how far away their touch comes from, that they're traceable forever. I'm reading a comment here. We've notified the building commissioners team about, is there a problem with the presentation mode?
Yes, it's in presentation mode, David. If you could change that, that would be great.
So what do you want to change to, Yin? Could you?
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Yep. And if you just take it out of presenter's view, that would be great.
All right. Okay. All right.
Sorry about that. I missed your message. And
that's okay.
So look, what you're seeing in the work that we're doing is that we're very much multi-jurisdictional in our focus. So initially, our conversations with industry were ones that said, unless we can have that line of sight to all of the players such that they see the value of starting to look after their digital twin, then we're going to constantly be chasing our tail. So our new licensing platform in New South Wales will actually be built around the digital twinning of each of the practitioners. So whether you're an architect or a designer or an engineer, a builder, a certifier, and progressively others in the supply chain, as you progressively become identifiable on our digital twin platform, you will need to be thinking about the fact that that twin will be on your shoulder for the rest of your life. And that's starting now to get people to realize, it could be a bad look for me not to look after my digital twin. So people are going to start to make a choice about what company they might work for, and as to whether the association with that company may be an advantage or disadvantage in the building out of their digital twin. So we're looking to build a 360-degree view of buildings and players such that we can then report on the trustworthiness of a building. So I'm going to hand that to Yin in a second. My final statement here is that bottom right-hand part of that slide. You'll see that the driver of that bus is at the back, and you'll see now that the other side of it is the driver of that bus is at the front. We have a absolutely focused lead on making sure that we have a proactive regulator that is driving from the front of the bus, not the back of the bus. So there's some very big changes going on in New South Wales, and I understand that we're being observed around many jurisdictions at this time. So it's been great to share that with you, and it's also terribly important to acknowledge the collaboration that we've had with the designers. Really, I hope that they now will look back on this period of time in New South Wales at least and say, we've reset their dignity. We've re-established the fact that designers have to be engaged properly, and they have to be qualified, and they have to do work which is accountable, and contractors have to build to proper designs, because in New South Wales, the days of actually building and then designing are over. So I hope that designers around New South Wales are happy, and I hope that around the rest of the world you're interested. Over to you, Yin.
Good morning, Yin. Before you start, if you could just put it into presenter mode, the screen in presenter mode, and share that. That way, then correct, and then you've got to put that into your share screen option, because we're getting the presenter mode coming up with the countdown and next slides and so forth. Yeah. You with me, or I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yin, you can hear, can't you?
Yep. That's fine.
So Yin, can you take over, please?
Yeah,
Thanks,
sorry,
David.
I was on mute. Okay. Okay. If everyone can see the slide now, just taking on some of David's concepts, we have started a program of work to build out this market-led platform solution, which will calculate the trustworthy index. Now, this trustworthy index is made up of 3 key components. We felt through the current system where we're collecting certificates, and every building has an occupation certificate. But what we're finding with our OC audits is that start the video? Right, cool. Sorry.
Yep, you're on.
All right. So effectively, the certificates that we are collecting is a more comprehensive set of certificates throughout the design, the planning, the construction process, as well as through after settlement, because we know that constructing a good quality building is not the end of the road. We need to ensure that that building is maintained correctly. So that certification collection is throughout the building's life cycle. We felt that we needed other aspects of data collection in terms of materials, as well as who's participated in that building development to form what we call a trustworthy index. Because we found that the certificates at the moment, that process, everybody has an occupation certificate, but yet we're still finding defects in buildings. So we need to understand the actual participants, and as David said, we're working with Equifax to get that rating incorporated, as well as tracing materials throughout that long supply chain, because there is no concept of a New South Wales building. All materials are sourced globally, so we need to build a global product that will effectively add to that the details of that building. Now, these 3 components and the data that's collected form what we call a risk profile of the building, and a trustworthy rating is calculated from that. This forms what we call the building DNA. This is separate to what you probably known as digital twin, which we feel is the built environment. what we're concerned with is the assurance of that building, actually what makes up that building. Moving on to the next slide. The other initiative that we find is key is the sustainability initiatives that's worldwide now. And through our work with the Department of Environment, we can now extend that building materials traceability to actually calculate the carbon accounting. So that's conversations that we're having at the moment. A lot of companies are looking at building green buildings, managing waste from building sites. And that's where we feel the building designers can actually contribute quite a big part in this, to actually design these elements into the building right at the beginning, rather than we having to deal with waste at the end. So coming to what we call the building digital thread, DNA of the building, what we've implemented so far is looking at how do we capture who's actually been the participants in that building, all the design practitioners, all the designs, the materials that have gone into that building, who has certified that building, who's built that building, as well as all the certificates that go into the construction process. Now, the reason why we've done that and put all these elements into one thread is so that we can trace at the end how that building has been constructed. It's important for that thread to go through. We're working on different threads that will add to that. So we've been working with the cement manufacturers to understand the long supply chain, going right back to the manufacturers and the mines that the materials came from. All of these threads come together in that trustworthy index. We're looking at new buildings at the moment, but as buildings are renovated and remediated, that cycle will go back through the building life cycle again. So we can capture at any point what the trustworthy index of that building is. David, did you want to add anything? You're on mute.
Still can't hear David. You've got to switch cameras. We do have a few questions that have come in.
Oh, yeah.
So, I've got them. We've also had an option where they could send them in on email previously,
Okay.
prior to today. So I've got a couple of questions here.
Yeah, do you want to answer?
Did David want to try and tune in first, or?
I think he's on
I think
mute.
I think I'm unmuted now. Is that right?
Oh, yep, you're on, David.
And I think just if I could round out what Yin has been talking about, this building digital thread that we're building is the centerpiece to resetting the way that insurers will look at buildings, and both for their insurable life, but we also see this as a way of building back into reducing the risk around professional indemnity insurance, where insurers are going to have a much better line of sight to the players, all the people who put stuff in, so that they can see a building from a point of view of its real DNA and its real trustworthiness. So you'll hear more about this in the coming year, but we have really made a huge amount of progress to building a capability that will reset the way this industry in New South Wales at least works into the future. Our Minister will be announcing in the next few weeks that we'll be commencing work around a decennial insurance policy for new multi-unit residential buildings, where multi-unit residential buildings will have a 10-year warranty underwritten by an insurance policy available to the owners of those buildings on the very first day of the building's life. We see that as a really huge consumer-facing benefit, and what that'll do is it'll redefine the way that the construction industry feeds into that, because the pricing mechanisms now can be really set around the trustworthiness of the players. So if you're really, really trusted, then your premium will be low. If you're less trusted, your premium will be high. So this is quite a game-changing capability that we've built. It's taken us a year and a half to get to this point, and we're pretty excited about where we're going to head from here. It's in a collaboration with KPMG, and the technology platform will use blockchain. So, questions?
Okay, David. So one of the first questions we've got is what percentage of new buildings are deemed defective?
So far, we've done a research project and looked back on some 6,000 buildings that have been built in the last 6 years in New South Wales. We had over 500 completed surveys, quite detailed surveys from those buildings, and the intel says that 36% of those buildings had what we call serious defects in their common property. So we're not looking at the consumer type issues of inside the lots, but the serious defects in the common property. So 36% of buildings had serious defects that were built in the last 6 years, and the areas of the defects included structure. Waterproofing was the most significant, of course. Fire services was the second. Structure was the third. Building services were next, and then the enclosure of the building. So we've now got quite a detailed line of sight into what buildings had them and what is in fact the type of defect that is being experienced. So that's allowing us now to prioritize our inspection resources to really target those things.
Thank you, David. I guess that the next question I had was, are there particular sectors or portions within the building that you seem to be like a common denominator of continuous defects, and you've just listed waterproofing. So I guess that would be one of the most contentious ones.
But look, you know, one of the things you have to realise is that owners of these buildings are quite unsophisticated. So some of them don't look for the things that we look for. They don't look at the structure particularly. They really reel from the waterproofing issues because their bathrooms leak or something else leaks. But so we're looking at structure. I think we're going to see much more structural issues appearing. I predict that will be the next upswing, structure.
Okay. There's a question here from Prakash. How is the rating verified if ratings are true or not?
Yeah.
So I just want to, if I could speak to that in just on why we've gone about the process we have. We only want a rating service provided by someone who is a regulated rater. So, for example, Equifax is a regulated rating agency, just like Standard & Poor's and Moody's, because we can't afford to have something like a TripAdvisor service providing ratings because we're dealing with the substance of people's businesses. So you'll see on this product called iCert, it's spelled I, capital CIRT. If you look it up, you'll see that it comes from an organisation that is rated, and that allows anybody who's rated and they don't like it, they can lodge a complaint, and that's overseen by our regulator here in Australia, APRA. So these are very believable and trusted rating processes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Look, we have to start to wrap up because we've got another speaker coming on 11. But first, I'd like to. Oh, hang on. We've got another. I've got an influx, David. I'll do another one quickly. In this new model, what is the real world difference between the TWI and builders licenses, and why should we trust a TWI if we can't trust a builder's license?
As you know, the world is moving to much more frictionless licensing. The recognition of licenses around the world will leave us with some confusion. We're going for a trust-weighted indice because simply that can allow us to look at the players over time and the work that they do. So that'll allow us then to go back and validate their licenses and see whether those licenses are appropriate, whether they should be challenged, or whether there's some form of other corrections that need to be done.
Thank you. And look, David, we really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you very much for coming on board. We know that I've had a great relationship with you since you've become the new building commissioner here in New South Wales, and the BDA has really been grateful for everything that you and your team have done. We've seen a real shift here in New South Wales, and I do know that when we do speak to other governments around Australia that they are watching and monitoring what the New South Wales government and yourself and your team are doing here in New South Wales. And I guess that, we're the guinea pigs for the rest of the nation for them to try and follow suit.
Well, let me call out Ian though, because none of this is possible unless we've had the digital capability. If anybody thinks that a modern regulator is going to be able to play the game without deep digital capability, they're dreaming. So you're talking to the digital doctor in the room here. So I want to call out Ian. She's a very special colleague.
Yep. So look, thank you, Ian. Thank you, David. Thank you, Matt Press, and everyone in your team. It's been wonderful having you on to start this first of many presentations for our next 24 hours. So I'd like to thank you once again on behalf of the BDAA, and thank you and enjoy the rest of your day and stay COVID safe.
Good luck, everybody. Have a good day. Bye now.